The iron gate of Leadville's general store slammed shut behind Deanna Thompson as she stepped onto the frozen mud of Harrison Avenue, her breath forming white clouds in the December air of 1881. Behind her, three women clustered near the pot-bellied stove whispered loud enough for her to hear every venomous word about Nathan Wright and his cursed mountain, where two wives had already perished in the brutal Colorado winters, and how this foolish girl from Boston would be the third corpse come spring. Deanna pulled her wool coat tighter, her gloved fingers trembling not from cold but from rage at the gossip that had followed her for the week since she'd arrived in this mining town 10,000 feet above sea level. She hadn't traveled 2,000 miles by train and stagecoach to be frightened away by wagging tongues and dire predictions. Her father's debts had left her with nothing but a ticket west and a letter from a man seeking a wife who could handle isolation and hardship. Nathan Wright had been honest in his correspondence, brutally so. He told her about the mountain, the cabin 12 miles from town, the snows that could trap a person for weeks. He told her about his first wife, Sarah, dead from pneumonia after a winter of inadequate supplies. He told her about Margaret, his second wife, who'd lasted only 6 weeks before walking out into a blizzard in what the town decided was either madness or suicide. What he hadn't told her was that the entire population of Leadville seemed to have placed bets on how long she would survive. She walked toward the livery stable where Nathan had promised to meet her at noon. The altitude made her lightheaded, each breath not quite enough to fill her lungs properly. Boston had been at sea level, comfortable, civilized. This place felt like the edge of the world, surrounded by mountains so massive they seemed to scrape the pale winter sky. The livery stable smelled of hay and horses and manure. A tall man stood beside a wagon loaded with supplies, his back to her as he checked the harness on 2 sturdy draft horses. He wore a heavy sheepskin coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. "Mr. Wright?" Deanna's voice came out steadier than she felt. He turned slowly, and she got her first real look at the man she'd agreed to marry. The letters had included no photograph. Nathan Wright appeared to be in his late 20s, perhaps 28 or 9, with a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors in harsh conditions. His eyes were a startling gray-green like moss on stone, and they studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away. He wasn't handsome in any conventional sense, his features too rough, his jaw too angular, but there was something compelling about him nonetheless. "Miss Thompson." He touched the brim of his hat. "You're lighter packed than I expected. I sold most of what I owned before leaving Boston. You wrote that space was limited." "That I did." He gestured to the wagon bed. "Got flour, salt pork, dried beans, coffee, sugar, lamp oil, candles, matches, and enough ammunition to see us through. Medical supplies, too. Got some laying hens in crates and a milk cow tied to the back. We'll need to move quick if we want to reach the cabin before dark." "Shouldn't we marry first?" Deanna had assumed there would be a ceremony in town, brief and businesslike perhaps, but official. Nathan's expression didn't change. "Rever ends up at the Methodist church. Won't take but 10 minutes if you're still willing. I gave my word in my letters." "I don't go back on my word." Something flickered in his eyes, approval maybe or relief. "Neither do I. Come on then." The wedding was even more austere than she'd imagined. The Reverend, a thin man with rheumy eyes and trembling hands, performed the ceremony in a cold church with no witnesses, except the livery boy Nathan had pulled in off the street. Deanna spoke her vows clearly, watching Nathan's face as he repeated his own promises. His voice was low and rough like gravel underfoot, but he didn't stumble over the words. When the Reverend pronounced them married, Nathan didn't kiss her. He simply nodded once, gave the Reverend a silver dollar, and walked back out into the cold. The wagon ride began in silence. Leadville fell away behind them as Nathan guided the horses onto a narrow trail that climbed steadily upward into the mountains. Snow lined the path, deeper in the shadows where sunlight couldn't reach. The temperature dropped noticeably with each mile they traveled. "How long have you lived up here?" Deanna finally asked, needing to break the oppressive quiet. "Built the cabin 7 years ago. Was prospecting then, thought I'd found a silver vein worth working. Turned out to be mostly rock and wishful thinking, but by then I'd put too much work into the place to abandon it. Why not move back to town? Can't stomach being crowded. Too many people, too much noise. Up on the mountain, it's just the wind and the trees and your own thoughts." "And your wives?" Deanna kept her voice neutral. "What happened to them, truly?" Nathan's hands tightened on the reins. "Sarah got sick in January of '79. I tried to get her down to town, but the snow was too deep. Took the horses and went for help, but by the time I got back with the doctor, she was already gone. Margaret, she came up the next winter, lasted until February. Woke up one morning and she was just gone, walked right out the door without her coat. Found her 2 days later, frozen under a pine tree half a mile from the cabin. Why did she leave? Don't know. She never said she was unhappy, never complained. Then one morning, gone." He glanced sideways at Deanna. "You prone to melancholy?" "No. I'm prone to practicality and stubbornness, which my mother always said would be my downfall. Might be your salvation up here." The trail grew steeper, the wagon lurching over rocks and frozen ruts. Deanna gripped the wooden seat to keep from sliding. The trees closed in around them, towering pines and bare aspens that rattled in the wind. Occasionally she glimpsed clearings where the snow lay smooth and undisturbed, pristine, and somehow menacing in its emptiness. "Town folks say your mountain is cursed," Deanna said. "Town folks say a lot of things, most of it nonsense. They seem very certain I'll be dead by spring." Nathan pulled the horses to a stop and turned to face her fully for the first time since they'd left Leadville. His eyes searched her face, looking for something. "I won't lie to you, Deanna. Winter up here is hard. Harder than anything you've known in Boston. The cold gets into your bones. The isolation weighs on you. Some days you won't see the sun because the snow's coming down so thick. We'll be snowed in for weeks at a time, just the two of us in a small cabin. If you can't handle that, better to turn back now. And if I can handle it, then maybe you're the woman who'll finally prove them all wrong." He turned back to the horses and snapped the reins. "Either way, we'll find out soon enough." They reached the cabin as the sun touched the western peaks, flooding the valley with orange light that made the snow glow like embers. The cabin sat in a small clearing, surrounded by dense forest. It was larger than Deanna had expected, built from thick logs chinked with mud and moss. A stone chimney rose from one end, already trailing smoke. "Left the fire banked this morning," Nathan explained as he helped her down from the wagon. His hands at her waist were impersonal, releasing her immediately once her feet touched the ground. "Cabin should be warm enough." The interior was a single large room divided into sections by function. A cast iron stove dominated one corner, radiating heat. A rough-hewn table and 2 chairs occupied the center space. A bed frame with a corn husk mattress sat against the far wall, covered with heavy quilts and furs. Shelves lined the walls, holding supplies and equipment. A rocking chair sat near the stove, and beside it a basket containing yarn and knitting needles, relics from the previous wife. "I'll bring the supplies in," Nathan said. "You can get acquainted with the layout." Deanna walked slowly around the space, taking inventory. The cabin was clean but sparse, functional rather than comfortable. No curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floor, no decorative touches of any kind. It felt like a place built for survival, not for living. She found a basin and pitcher on a small stand, a mirror hanging above it. The water in the pitcher was frozen solid. She'd have to melt snow for washing, she realized. Everything would require more work here, more thought and planning. Nathan made several trips from the wagon, carrying in sacks of flour and beans, crates of supplies, the hen coops which he placed near the stove for warmth. He moved with efficient economy, no wasted motion. When everything was inside and the horses were stabled in the small barn beside the cabin, he stood by the door, snow dusting his shoulders. There's a spring house out back with a stream that doesn't freeze, runs under the floor. That's where we keep things cool. Outhouse is 20 paces west. Don't go wandering after dark, easy to get turned around in the trees. He paused, seeming uncertain for the first time. I'll sleep in the barn tonight, give you time to settle in. We're married, Deanna said quietly. You don't need to sleep in the barn. Don't know each other well enough for more than that just yet. Figured we'd take things slow. It was considerate, unexpected. Deanna nodded. Thank you. After he left, she stood in the center of the cabin, listening to the wind beginning to pick up outside, whistling through the trees. The fire crackled in the stove. The hens muttered softly in their crates. She was alone on a mountain in Colorado, married to a stranger, surrounded by wilderness that could kill her without malice or mercy. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. By the time Nathan returned in the morning, stamping snow from his boots, Diana had reorganized the entire cabin. She'd sorted the supplies into logical groupings, arranged the shelves for better access, scrubbed the table and swept the floor, and had coffee boiling on the stove along with a pot of beans she'd set to soak the night before. Nathan stopped in the doorway, staring. You've been busy. Idle hands and all that. Deanna poured coffee into 2 tin cups. I hope you don't mind that I rearranged things. It makes more sense to keep the medical supplies near the bed, and the cooking items should be closest to the stove. He accepted the coffee, wrapping his large hands around the cup. Makes sense. He drank, then looked at her over the rim. How'd you sleep? Poorly. The altitude affects my breathing and every sound outside seemed threatening. That's honest. Most women would pretend everything was fine. I'm not most women, Mr. Wright, or I wouldn't be here. Nathan. We're married. Might as well use given names. Then you should call me Deanna. They ate breakfast in silence, the beans flavored with a bit of the salt pork and some wild onions Nathan retrieved from a storage barrel. Afterward, he showed her around the property. The barn housed the 2 draft horses, a saddle horse, and now the milk cow. A chicken coop stood nearby, empty until they could move the hens from inside the cabin. The spring house was built over a flowing stream, the water icy but constant. A woodshed held split logs, though Nathan explained he'd need to cut more to see them through to spring. How much snow are you expecting? Deanna asked, looking at the clear blue sky. This is nothing. When the real storms come, snow will be up past your waist. We'll have to dig tunnels to get to the barn and the woodshed. Sometimes the drifts pile so high against the cabin we can't even open the door, have to climb out the window. How do you get supplies if you're snowed in for weeks? You don't. That's why we stocked up in town. Everything we need for the next 5 months is either in that cabin or in these outbuildings. If we run short, we do without. It was a sobering thought. Deanna followed him back inside, her mind already working through the implications. They would need to be careful with portions, strategic about fuel consumption, mindful of every resource. Over the next week, they fell into a routine. Nathan spent his days cutting wood, hunting, checking trap lines he'd set up in the forest for small game. Deanna managed the cabin, cooking meals, caring for the chickens and cow, melting snow for water, keeping the fire fed. They spoke little, both focused on the work of survival. At night, Nathan still slept in the barn despite the temperature dropping well below freezing. Deanna didn't press him on it. The arrangement felt safer somehow, less complicated. They were strangers sharing a space, and the physical distance seemed appropriate. 10 days after their arrival at the cabin, the first major storm hit. Diana woke to an eerie silence. No wind, no bird calls, nothing. She rose from the bed and went to the window. The world outside had vanished behind a solid wall of white. Snow fell so thickly she couldn't see the barn, couldn't see anything beyond a few feet from the glass. The door burst open, admitting a gust of snow and wind, and Nathan, his coat white with accumulation. "Storm's here. I'll be staying inside from now on, too dangerous to go back and forth." He'd brought his bedroll and a few personal items. Deanna helped him shake the snow from his coat and hang it near the stove to dry. When she looked outside again, his footprints from the barn had already disappeared, filled in completely. "How long will it last?" she asked. "Could be 3 days, could be a week. No way to know." The storm raged for 5 days straight. Snow piled against the cabin walls, climbing higher each time Deanna looked. The windows were buried, leaving the cabin in perpetual dimness even during what should have been daylight. They kept the lamps burning and the fire hot, burning through wood at an alarming rate. The forced proximity revealed more about Nathan than a month of careful distance would have. He was methodical, organized, surprisingly well-read. He had a small collection of books on a high shelf, volumes of poetry and philosophy, alongside practical manuals on farming and animal husbandry. He whittled in the evenings, his large hands carving intricate figures from pieces of pine, the shavings curling into a bowl at his feet. "Where did you learn that?" Deanna asked, watching him shape what appeared to be a bird in flight. "My father. He was a carpenter before he went west looking for gold. Never found any, but he taught me to work with wood." Nathan held up the carving, examining it critically. "Haven't made much time for it in recent years. It's beautiful," he handed it to her. "Keep it then." Deanna turned the small wooden bird over in her hands, feeling the smooth curves, the careful detail of each feather. It was a gift, simple but meaningful. "Thank you." That night when Nathan spread his bedroll on the floor by the stove, Deanna spoke up. "The floor is freezing. The bed is large enough for 2 if you stay on your side." He looked at her for a long moment. "You sure? We're both adults. I trust you to be a gentleman." "All right then." They lay side by side in the darkness, inches apart but not touching, listening to the wind howl outside. Deanna could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the pine sap on his skin from the wood he'd been carving. It was strange and intimate and somehow comforting. "Deanna." His voice was quiet in the dark. "Yes? Thank you for coming here, for giving this a chance. Ask me again in spring if I'm glad I did." He laughed, a low rumble that she felt more than heard. "Fair enough." When the storm finally broke, they dug themselves out using shovels, carving a tunnel through snow that reached higher than Deanna's head. The world outside was transformed, buried under a white blanket that sparkled in the weak sunlight. The temperature had dropped drastically, cold enough that the inside of the windows were coated with intricate patterns of frost. Nathan spent an entire day just digging paths to the barn and outbuildings, the physical labor leaving him exhausted. Deanna heated water for washing and prepared hot meals, did what she could to make the cabin comfortable. They had survived their first real storm, but it was only December. The hardest months lay ahead. Christmas came without celebration or acknowledgement. They had no decorations, no special food, no gifts beyond the wooden bird Nathan had already given her. Deanna spent the day as she spent every other, working to maintain their small household, and tried not to think about Boston, about her parents' house decorated with evergreen boughs and ribbons, about the parties and the caroling and the sense of festivity that she would never experience again. She must have looked melancholy because Nathan, returning from checking the trap lines, set down a snow-covered bundle and said, "Come with me tomorrow. You've been cooped up too long." "Where?" "Hunting. Fresh meat would do us good, and you need to learn the land around here. If something happens to me, you need to know how to survive on your own." It was practical, sensible, and slightly terrifying. "I've never hunted. I'll teach you." They set out before dawn, Deanna dressed in layers of wool and canvas, wearing a pair of Nathan's smaller boots stuffed with extra socks. He carried his rifle and showed her how to walk in snowshoes, the strange webbed frames that kept them from sinking hip-deep with each step. The forest was silent and ghostly in the pre-dawn light, the snow muffling all sound. Nathan moved through the wilderness with unconscious grace, reading signs Deanna couldn't see. He pointed out deer tracks, showed her where elk had scraped bark from the aspens, explained how to identify which paths the animals used regularly. "Margaret couldn't stand the hunting," he said quietly as they knelt behind a fallen log, watching a game trail. "Said it was barbaric. But up here, if you don't hunt, you go hungry." What was she like? Deanna had been curious about the second wife, the woman who'd walked into a blizzard rather than face another day on the mountain. Quiet. Too quiet, maybe. She'd go days without speaking. "I thought she was just shy, but looking back, I think she was slipping away from the start. Should have taken her back to town, but I kept thinking she'd adjust, that she just needed more time." "You can't blame yourself for her choice." "Can I? I brought her up here, knew how hard it was. Should have seen the signs." A deer emerged onto the trail, a young doe stepping delicately through the snow. Nathan raised his rifle slowly, taking careful aim. The shot cracked loud in the cold air, and the deer dropped instantly, dead before it hit the ground. He'd shot it clean through the heart, a merciful kill. They spent the next hour field dressing the carcass and hauling it back to the cabin on a sled Nathan had brought for the purpose. It was hard, bloody work, but Deanna didn't look away or complain. She helped as best she could, learning despite her revulsion. "You did well today," Nathan said as they hung the deer in the barn to age. "Better than I expected for your first time. I'm tougher than I look. I'm starting to believe that." Something shifted between them after that day. Nathan began including Deanna in more of the outdoor work, teaching her to split wood, to read the weather, to recognize the signs of an approaching storm. She proved herself capable and willing, never shying from hard work or discomfort. January brought cold so intense it hurt to breathe. The temperature dropped to 20 below zero, then 30, then 40. Ice formed on the inside walls of the cabin despite the roaring fire. The livestock huddled in the barn, and Nathan had to break ice on their water several times a day. Going outside was dangerous. Exposed skin could freeze in minutes. They stayed close to the cabin, venturing out only when absolutely necessary. Trapped inside together for days at a time, they talked. Deanna told him about Boston, about her father's shipping business that had collapsed when 2 vessels were lost at sea, about the creditors who'd taken everything, about her mother's death from heartbreak and shame. Nathan told her about growing up in Missouri, about his parents dying of cholera, about coming west to start over, to find something solid and real in a world that felt increasingly false. "Why did you want a wife?" Deanna asked one night as they sat by the fire, her hands busy with mending. "You seem content with solitude." Content isn't the same as happy. Gets lonely up here, having no one to talk to, no one to share things with. Thought maybe a partner would make it easier, make it feel less like just surviving and more like actually living. And has it? He looked at her, his gray-green eyes reflecting the firelight. Yes, though maybe not for the reasons I expected. What do you mean? I thought I needed someone to keep house, to cook and clean and provide basic companionship. Turns out what I actually needed was someone strong enough to handle this life without breaking. Someone who'd challenge me to be better instead of just accepting how things are. Deanna felt warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. I'm not that extraordinary, Nathan. I'm just stubborn. Stubborn is exactly what's required up here. The third week of January brought another massive storm, worse than the first. The wind screamed around the cabin, shaking the walls, howling down the chimney. Snow came sideways, building drifts that completely buried the windows. The temperature inside the cabin dropped despite the fire burning constantly. They burned through their wood supply faster than planned. Nathan looked at the depleting pile with worry. Going to have to make a trip to the woodshed. We need more logs. I'll come with you. We can carry more together. Too dangerous. Wind like this can turn you around in seconds. Then tie a rope from the cabin to the shed. We'll have a guideline. It was sensible, and Nathan agreed. They tied a length of rope to the door handle, and Nathan fought his way through the storm to the woodshed, playing out the line as he went. It took him twice as long as it should have, and when he returned with a load of wood, his face was wind-burned, his eyebrows thick with ice. Your turn to stay inside, Deanna said firmly. Tell me what to do and I'll bring the next load. Deanna, I can't let you. We need the wood and you need to warm up before you get frostbite. Don't argue with me. She followed the rope through wind that nearly knocked her off her feet, snow stinging any exposed skin like needles. The woodshed was only 30 feet from the cabin but felt like miles. She loaded wood into the canvas sling Nathan had shown her how to use, then fought her way back along the rope, her fingers numb despite thick gloves. They made 4 more trips together over the next hour, working in rotation, one of them always warming by the fire while the other braved the storm. By the time they had enough wood stacked inside to last several days, they were both exhausted, shaking from cold and exertion. Nathan heated water for washing, then turned his back while Deanna stripped off her wet clothes and cleaned herself with a cloth, standing as close to the stove as she dared. She pulled on dry, long underwear and a thick nightgown, then wrapped herself in a blanket. Nathan did the same, both of them too cold and tired for modesty to matter much. They climbed into bed together, piling every quilt and fur they owned on top, huddling close to share body heat. Deanna's teeth chattered, her whole body shivering uncontrollably. Nathan pulled her against his chest, wrapping his arms around her. Just trying to warm you up, he said, his voice rough. Nothing improper. I know. Deanna pressed closer, soaking up his warmth. His heart beat steady against her ear. His arms around her felt safe, protective. She fell asleep like that, and when she woke hours later, she hadn't moved and neither had he. February arrived with no let-up in the cold. They were completely snowed in now, the cabin buried to the roofline on the north side. Nathan had to climb out a window to reach the barn each day, wading through snow that reached his chest in places. The livestock was their lifeline, the chickens still laying a few eggs, the cow providing milk that they turned into butter and cheese. Deanna found herself watching Nathan with different eyes, the way he moved, economical and sure, the rare smile that transformed his weathered face, the gentleness with which he handled the animals, his big hands surprisingly tender. They'd been married 2 months, but had only really known each other for a few weeks of forced proximity. Yet she felt something growing between them, something warm and solid. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Nathan reading aloud from a book of poetry while Deanna knitted socks from undyed wool, she realized she'd forgotten to be afraid. The mountain that had seemed so threatening now felt almost protective, isolating them in their own small world. The winter that was supposed to break her had instead revealed her strength. "Nathan," she set down her knitting, he looked up from the book. "Yes, I'm glad I came here, I want you to know that." His expression softened. "I'm glad you came too, more than I can properly say." "Then don't say it, show me." He set the book aside slowly, his eyes searching her face. "Deanna, are you sure? We're married. We've survived things together that would have destroyed most people. I think we've earned the right to be properly married, don't you?" Nathan stood and crossed to where she sat in the rocking chair. He knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "I want you to understand something. If we do this, if we become husband and wife in truth, I'm going to love you with everything I have. I'm not good at half measures or pretending. It'll be all or nothing. All sounds good to me." He leaned forward and kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. His hands cupped her face, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. What followed was tentative and sweet, both of them nervous despite being adults. Nathan was careful with her, patient, making sure she was comfortable, that she truly wanted this. Deanna had been told by other women that the marriage bed was a duty to be endured, but with Nathan it felt like something else entirely, like a conversation conducted without words, a giving and receiving that bound them together in a way their formal vows hadn't. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, Deanna's head on Nathan's chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "I love you," he said quietly. "Don't know when it happened exactly, but it's true. I love you too. I think I started falling for you when you gave me that wooden bird. That simple gesture, it showed me you were capable of beauty, not just survival, that you had softness underneath all that rough exterior." He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Not sure anyone's ever called me soft before. Good. I like being the only one who knows." March came with a false promise of spring. The days grew longer, the sun stronger. The snow began to melt during the daytime, though it still froze hard at night. Nathan started talking about the trip to town, the supplies they'd need to replenish, the seeds they should buy for a garden. "You'll want to write letters," he said one morning. "Let people back in Boston know you're alive. I have no one left in Boston who cares. My only family now is here on this mountain." He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Then we'll have to make sure it's a good enough family to be worth having." 3 months to the day after Deanna had arrived at the cabin, the weather finally broke properly. The temperature rose above freezing and stayed there. Snow melted in earnest, revealing brown grass and muddy earth. The stream in the springhouse ran high and fast with runoff. Birds returned, their songs filling the air. Nathan hitched up the wagon and they began the journey down to Leadville. Deanna felt strange leaving the cabin after so long, like she was leaving some piece of herself behind. But she was also eager to see other people, to walk on streets instead of snow, to prove to all those gossiping women that she had not only survived but thrived. They reached town in the late afternoon. Leadville seemed smaller than Deanna remembered, dirtier and more chaotic. People stopped to stare as they drove past, clearly shocked to see her alive and well. Nathan pulled up in front of the general store, the same one where Deanna had heard the dire predictions about her survival. He helped her down from the wagon, his hand lingering at her waist. Together they walked inside. The 3 gossiping women were there, clustered by the counter as if they'd never moved. They fell silent as Diana entered, their eyes wide with disbelief. "Good afternoon," Diana said pleasantly. "I wonder if you could help me. I need to order seeds for a substantial garden. Tomatoes, beans, squash, carrots, lettuce. Oh, and I'll need several yards of good fabric. I'm expecting a child come October and I'll need to sew some things." The silence stretched out, broken finally by Nathan's quiet laugh. He wrapped an arm around Diana's shoulders, pulling her close. "You heard the lady. We've got a long list of supplies to order and we'd appreciate your help filling it." The women scrambled to assist, their earlier certainty shattered. Diana caught snatches of whispered conversations as they shopped. "How did she survive? She looks healthy, not half-starved." Maybe it wasn't the mountain after all, maybe it was the other wives. Diana didn't bother correcting them. Let them wonder and speculate. She knew the truth. The mountain hadn't been the problem. The winters hadn't been too harsh. The other wives had simply given up, unable to find strength in hardship, unable to see beauty in isolation. She had proven everyone wrong, not by enduring but by thriving, by finding love in the last place anyone expected. They spent 2 days in Leadville, restocking supplies, visiting the land office to file proper claims on Nathan's property, seeing a doctor who confirmed Diana's pregnancy. On the second evening, as they prepared to return to the mountain, the reverend who had married them stopped Nathan on the street. "Son, I have to admit I was certain we'd be burying another wife come spring. I'm glad to be wrong." "She's stronger than anyone gave her credit for," Nathan said, looking at Diana with obvious pride. "Including me initially. What made the difference, do you think?" Nathan considered the question seriously. The other wives saw the mountain as something to survive. Diana saw it as something to conquer. "That's a different thing entirely." The reverend nodded slowly. "Well, I'm happy for you both, truly." On the journey back up the mountain, Diana leaned against Nathan's shoulder, comfortable and content. The wagon was loaded with supplies. Their pockets held the papers making Nathan's claim official, and inside her a new life was growing. "Nervous about being a father?" she asked, terrified, but also excited. "Having a child up there, it'll be different, harder in some ways. We'll manage. We've proven we can handle whatever comes." "That we have." They reached the cabin as sunset painted the remaining snow patches orange and gold. The air smelled of pine and thawing earth and possibility. Nathan lifted Diana down from the wagon, but instead of releasing her, he held her close, his forehead resting against hers. "I never thought I'd have this," he said quietly. "A real partnership. Someone who understands what this life requires and chooses it anyway. You gave me a chance when I had nothing. You taught me to be strong, to find joy in small things. How could I not love you for that?" They stood like that for a long moment, breathing together, hearts beating in synchronization. Then Nathan swept her up into his arms, carrying her across the threshold of the cabin like he should have done the first time. Diana laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "We're already married, you know. The romantic gestures are a bit late. Never too late to do things proper." He set her down gently inside, then went back out to unload the wagon. Diana looked around the cabin, seeing it with fresh eyes. It wasn't much by Boston standards, just a single room carved out of wilderness. But it was home, truly home in a way that nothing in Boston had ever been. Over the following months, they worked to improve the place. Nathan built an addition onto the cabin, creating a separate bedroom for privacy. Diana planted the garden, coaxing vegetables from the rocky soil. They acquired more chickens, another cow, and a pair of pigs. The mountain became not just a place to survive, but a place to build a life. Diana's pregnancy progressed smoothly. She remained active throughout, refusing to be treated as fragile. Nathan worried constantly, but Deanna was firm. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I'll be fine. Not alone on a mountain miles from a doctor. Then it's good you're here to help. When her time came in early October, Deanna labored for 12 hours while Nathan paced and worried and tried to remember everything he'd learned from helping with difficult births in livestock. But Deanna needed no help. She delivered a healthy baby boy with a strength that left Nathan in awe. "We should name him Thomas," Deanna said, cradling the infant, "after my father. He made mistakes, but he loved me in his way. Thomas Wright." Nathan touched his son's tiny fist, watching the miniature fingers curl around his larger one. "It's a good, strong name." The first winter with a baby was harder than either of them had anticipated. Thomas was colicky, crying for hours, and Deanna struggled with exhaustion. Nathan did what he could, walking the baby at night, changing diapers, heating milk when Deanna needed rest. They worked together, sharing the burden, and somehow they survived. Spring came again, and then summer, the mountain transforming into a place of wild beauty. Deanna's garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables. Nathan expanded his trap lines, bringing in enough furs to sell for good money. They weren't wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. 2 years after that first brutal winter, Deanna delivered a second child, a girl they named Sarah after Nathan's first wife. "She deserves to be remembered with love, not just sorrow," Deanna said, and Nathan agreed, his eyes wet with tears. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy who loved the mountain as naturally as breathing. Sarah was quieter, more thoughtful, spending hours watching the birds and squirrels with fascinated attention. Nathan taught them both to read using his small library of books. Deanna taught them arithmetic and writing. The isolation that would have driven most people mad became their classroom and playground. When Thomas was 5 and Sarah was 3, another family moved onto the mountain, homesteading a claim about 6 miles south. The Johnsons had 3 children and similar ideas about self-sufficiency and solitude. The two families began trading goods and helping with major projects, building a sense of community without sacrificing independence. "See," Deanna said one evening as they watched the children playing together during a visit, "the mountain isn't cursed, it just requires the right people." "You were the right person from the start," Nathan said. "I just didn't know it yet. When did you know?" "That first storm, when you insisted on helping haul wood even though it was dangerous. You could have stayed safe inside, but you understood we were partners, that your survival depended on both of us being strong. That's when I knew you'd make it. And when did you know you loved me?" He smiled, pulling her close. "Probably the moment you told those women in the general store you were expecting. The look on their faces was priceless, but the pride I felt in you was bigger than anything I'd ever experienced. That's when I knew it wasn't just respect or attraction, it was real love." 5 years became 10. The cabin grew again, expanding to accommodate their growing family. Deanna delivered 2 more children, another boy named William and finally a girl named Margaret, honoring the second wife who had struggled so hard. Thomas at 10 was already helping with the serious work of the homestead, cutting wood and hunting with his father. Sarah at 8 was Deanna's shadow, learning to cook and garden and preserve food. William at 5 was the wild one, always exploring, always getting into trouble. Baby Margaret was only a year old, just learning to walk. The homestead had become prosperous by mountain standards. Nathan's fur trapping brought in steady income. Deanna sold butter and cheese and vegetables to other families scattered through the mountains. They'd acquired more livestock, built better outbuildings, improved the cabin until it was genuinely comfortable. But more than the physical improvements, they'd built something less tangible but more valuable. They'd created a real home, filled with love and laughter and the everyday struggles that made life rich. The mountain that was supposed to break Diana had instead revealed her true strength. The man who'd lost 2 wives to isolation had found a partner who understood him completely. One evening in late summer, 15 years after Diana first arrived in Leadville, they sat on the porch Nathan had built, watching the sun set over the peaks. The children were asleep inside. The livestock was settled for the night. The work was done, at least until morning. "You ever regret it?" Nathan asked. "Giving up Boston society, all the things you could have had?" Diana considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I'd stayed. But I don't regret coming here. This life is harder, but it's real. Everything we have, we've built with our own hands. Our children are growing up strong and capable, and I have you, which is worth more than all the comfort and society in the world. I don't deserve you." "Yes, you do. You gave me a chance when I was desperate. You taught me to be strong. You loved me when I was just learning to love myself. We deserve each other, Nathan." He took her hand, his work-roughened palm warm against hers. "Remember what I said that first winter? That if we became truly married, I'd love you with everything I had. I remember. I've kept that promise. Every single day for 15 years, I've loved you with everything in me, and I'll keep loving you that way for the rest of my life." Diana leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere an owl called, and from the barn came the soft sounds of the animals settling. The mountain breeze carried the scent of pine and wild roses. "The town still talks about me sometimes," Diana said, "about how I survived when the others didn't. What do they say? That I must be part mountain myself, that I'm too stubborn to let a little thing like winter kill me. That you must have learned some secret to keeping a wife alive after losing the first 2. What do you think is the secret? There is no secret. Margaret and Sarah, they weren't weak or wrong. They just weren't meant for this life. I was. Maybe I always was, I just didn't know it until I got here." Nathan kissed the top of her head. "You proved everyone wrong, including me. I thought I needed someone to survive with. Turns out I needed someone to truly live with." They sat in comfortable silence as full darkness fell, the cabin behind them glowing with lamplight, their children safe and warm inside. Against all odds and expectations, they had built something lasting on this mountain. They had taken isolation and hardship and transformed it into love and family and home. Diana Thompson, the girl from Boston who was supposed to be dead within 3 months, had instead found her truest self in the Colorado wilderness. She had proven that survival wasn't about enduring hardship, but about embracing it, transforming it, making it into something beautiful. And Nathan Wright, the man who'd lost everything twice before, had finally found what he'd been searching for all along. Someone strong enough to match him, stubborn enough to challenge him, and loving enough to make the harsh mountain winters feel warm. They had 3 months to prove the doubters wrong. They'd used those months to build a foundation that had lasted 15 years and would last a lifetime more. The mountain that was supposed to be cursed had instead blessed them with exactly what they needed. Solitude enough to find themselves, hardship enough to prove their strength, and isolation enough to discover that together they were complete. As autumn approached and the first hints of cold touched the air, Diana felt no fear of the coming winter. She'd survived her first season through sheer determination. She'd survived the following ones through growing skill and knowledge. Now she would survive simply because this was her life, her home, her choice. Nathan stood, pulling her to her feet. Come inside. It's getting cold. In a minute. I want to look at the stars a bit longer. Then I'll stay with you." And he did, standing beside her with his arm around her waist, both of them gazing up at the endless sky. 15 years ago, Diana had been alone and desperate, taking a chance on a man and a mountain that terrified her. Now she stood confident and content, beside the man she loved, on the land they'd tamed together. The doubters had been certain she would fail. They'd predicted her death within months. They'd compared her to the wives who'd come before and found her equally doomed. They'd all been wrong. Deanna Thompson Wright had not just survived Nathan Wright's mountain winters. She had conquered them. She had thrived on them. She had turned the isolation into intimacy, the hardship into happiness, the barren wilderness into a home filled with love. And as she stood beneath the Colorado stars with Nathan's arms around her and their children sleeping safely nearby, she knew with absolute certainty that she had found exactly where she belonged. Against all odds, despite all predictions, proving every doubter wrong in the most satisfying way possible by building a beautiful life in the place they swore would destroy her. The mountain had tested her and found her worthy. Nathan had loved her and found himself loved in return. And together, they had created something rare and precious, a partnership forged in hardship and tempered by time into something unbreakable. 3 months had been all it took to prove them wrong. 15 years had proven that she'd been right all along. And the rest of their lives stretched ahead, full of promise and possibility, built on the foundation of that first brutal winter when a stubborn girl from Boston had refused to let the mountain win. She had proven them wrong. She had survived. And more than that, she had lived, truly lived in a way most people never would. That was her victory, her triumph, her legacy, and it was more than enough.